To Iran 2 days from President Trump's ultimatum, explicitly warning of military action, of speed and violence of the mission, he said, describing an armada of US ships amassing in the Arabian Sea. Well, today a number of independent Western military analysts, including the defence correspondent for The Economist, Shashank Joshi, has spoken of the ongoing specific activity in recent hours. There are signals, we're told, preparations for a strike. There have been huge volumes of flights by C-17 cargo planes going all the way from the US across Europe to the Middle East, more elevated than would be expected. A movement of specific aircraft that you would associate too with the final stages of preparations, the RC-315, which is known as the rivet joint, it's a surveillance plane, the sort of thing you use to hover up emissions from radar, and something called the BACN, a battlefield airborne communications node that's used to relay communications in the air. Indicators, we're told, that are not normal. This at the same time the regime in Iran is focusing on diplomacy via a third party, Turkey. The foreign minister of Iran today stating in Ankara that Tehran will discuss a new nuclear deal as demanded by President Trump, but with a caveat, on equal terms, he said, and with red lines. Well, there are no current direct talks taking place, as we're told so far. Here's Emerald Maxwell.
Another day of uncertainty in Tehran. The U.S. has been threatening to strike the Iranian regime for weeks in what Donald Trump has described as a way of supporting protesters. On Thursday, the U.S. president repeated the same message.
We have a lot of very big, very powerful ships sailing to Iran right now, and it would be great if we didn't have to use them. Okay?
Can you say what the message was that you shared with Iranians?
Well, I told them two things. Number one, no nuclear. And number two, stop killing protesters. Thank you very much.
Trump first tweeted on January 2nd that the U.S. would react if protesters were killed. Since then, tens of thousands are believed to have been killed with no U.S. action on the ground. But pressure has grown with a naval buildup in the region. The U.S. now has the capability to both attack Iran and defend its forces and allies from possible retaliation. But many have urged Trump to abandon the idea of a strike against the regime. U.S. partners and regional powers appear to favor a negotiated deal that would leave Iran's leaders at the helm but make the country weaker while averting an escalation that could spill into their own countries. The UN Secretary General called for dialogue.
I encourage the parties to seriously negotiate in order to avoid a confrontation that would be a tragedy.
Meanwhile, Iranians have told reporters that authorities have arrested thousands of people in a new campaign of mass arrests and intimidation aimed at deterring further protests.
Well, as we're going to air right now, as we speak, President Trump is giving a press conference at the Oval Office. He's just been speaking about, quote, a large armada heading towards Iran, even larger than Venezuela. We heard that before 72 hours ago. If he says something new on that, we'll bring you up to date as soon as we hear it. He's giving a press conference about other related issues, but, you know, with President Trump, they go off the so-called weave. Let's bring in General Sir Richard Shirreff, former Deputy Supreme Allied Commander, Europe at NATO, the most senior position for any European officer. The post of Supreme Allied Commander is always held by an American official. General Sir Richard Shirreff, welcome to France 24. Great to talk to you and hear your thoughts tonight. Can we start with the most pressing theatre of likely operations, possible US strikes in Iran, as we've been hearing, this armada that President Trump threatens? Should President Trump intervene militarily? What's your assessment?
Well, thank you for having me. Should he intervene militarily? It depends what he wants to achieve. As you probably know, the first principle of war is selection and maintenance of the aim. I don't think we're clear what the aim is. Is it regime change? Is it to give the Iranians a bloody nose? Is it to distract Americans from the fact that ICE thugs are shooting, executing innocent people on the streets of Minneapolis? Or is it to distract attention from the Epstein files at home? I don't think it's clear. What is certain, though, is that the American record of intervention in the Middle East has not always gone according to plan. So I think he's on very thin ice.
It's a very good point. I'd like to raise that in a second with you. From a military perspective, if we're to listen to those around President Trump and some of the briefings that we're hearing, again, this is speculation because nothing has been stated clearly, you're quite right, but one of the scenarios that the certainly the White House, a briefing on is a removal of senior figures within the regime, possibly within the Iranian Revolutionary Guard as well. And yet who, we don't know. You're quite right. From a military perspective, if you were to consider scenarios now, if you've been briefed about what could go on without an end goal, your knowledge of US capabilities right now, knowing that they are within the strategic location, and Iran's capability to retaliate, how do you kind of calibrate that risk right now to the US forces?
Well, the Americans have demonstrated very effectively last year an ability to strike Iran in a pretty surgical way. We don't know for sure what the impact on those Iranian nuclear facilities was, but on the face of it, it was a pretty devastating strike without any casualties to the Americans. In terms of capabilities, well, I mean, it goes without saying, the American capabilities are massive. If you have a carrier group bearing down on Iran, the ability to strike from the air is significant. Clearly, at this stage of the game, the idea of ground troops is out of the picture. But I keep coming back to this point. It all depends what you want to do, and what the American commanders on the ground, or at sea, or in the region will be very, very, very cognizant of is the reality that frequently ill thought through interventions without a strategic objective and without thinking through the risks and linking risk and strategy frequently result in consequences worse than the state of affairs that you had originally intended to solve.
Which takes us to the point quite neatly, doesn't it, to the extent to which you believe the lessons from Iraq, from Afghanistan, really need to inform the decisions being taken potentially today, but potentially in hours to come.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think those NATO and coalition partners who operated and supported America in both Iraq and Afghanistan will still be really leery about any intervention, because there was, arguably tactically in many ways, there wasn't any form of tactical defeat, but strategically you have to wonder whether the justification was there in the first place, and certainly the consequences have been far-reaching.
Frank Gardner, who you know, the British security analyst and respected journalist, considers 7 outcomes this week from a successful change to democracy, less likely, he says, to the Ayatollah being replaced by the military, more likely perhaps, to internal chaos with a collapsed regime, which is also seen to be a possible, very likely danger if that happens. I mean, given what we've talked about, and we don't know the end goal, do you think the British, NATO partners as well, will likely be informed in advance about what's happening?
Good question. America's NATO partners were not informed in 2021 when President Biden pulled the rug from under the NATO mission in Afghanistan in August 21, and the result was total chaos. I don't think we can make any assumptions that NATO partners will be informed. You've seen the way Trump insulted NATO partners recently in his extraordinary remarks, insulting the way NATO partners had operated in Afghanistan. And the fact that Trump recently has threatened the territorial integrity of a NATO ally says to me that here is a NATO ally, an ally that is not, well, America cannot be trusted as an ally. So I think we make no assumptions that Trump is going to tell anybody apart from his own close hold people.
That friction, if we use political language of Mark Carney, the Canadian Prime Minister, last week, calling it a rupture in the old post-Soviet world order. Do you think that will be felt if it is a rupture at a NATO level? You know, your successors, the person doing your job that you did as Deputy Supreme Allied Commander, would they be feeling that in Brussels at the HQ?
I think almost certainly yes. They might be trying to paper over the cracks, but I think Prime Minister Carney was absolutely right in describing it as a rupture. The old global liberal order is with America as the hegemon is dead, and we should not mourn it, he said. We have to look to the future. I think his speech was very compelling. I think he absolutely was right about the need for what he described as middle powers to build unity of purpose and effort. Otherwise, frankly, they'll be picked off individually. I think on a broader level, the fact is that, as I said earlier, the trust in America has been completely shattered by the events of Davos. I think this was the moment when Europe needed to wake up to the reality that America can no longer be trusted or relied upon to underwrite European security. Although that was very clearly stated by Vice President Vance nearly a year ago in Munich, and indeed Secretary of War Hegseth in Brussels about a year ago as well. No, I think the reality is that NATO now needs the European members of NATO and Canada need to be looking at a new construct for NATO, which places Europe and Canada at the center, which maintains links with America, particularly one day a post-Trump America, but which does not depend on America. And this is a fundamental requirement now.
Going back further than last year for comment, I'd want to quote your own words back in 2014 when you were Supreme Allied Commander, and you gave an interview in which you said this, quote, "What we've seen in the last few weeks in Crimea has been a direct threat to Euro-Atlantic security. And this timely moment," you said, "of nations of NATO must sit up, take notice, recognise security in Europe is by no means guaranteed, and security comes at a price in terms of defence budget, in terms of equipment." Now, that's 2014. That's after the annexation by Russia of Crimea. It doesn't help for you to say, "I told you so," but that could be a quote from the past year. Is the message getting through?
Well, it's not getting through in Britain, I'm afraid, not with this government. I'll leave you to speak for France. But I stand absolutely by everything I said there. And if that message had been picked up back in 2014, we might not be where we are now. Anyway, we are. And if the message hasn't got through now, then Europe really is in peril. And I come back to Davos a couple of weeks ago. The message from Davos is that the rubber has finally hit the road irrevocably with Europe. No more appeasement of America, no more trying to Trump whisper. Recognize Trump's America for what it is, and recognize that Europe coming together, which it needs to be, can be a superpower in its own right, and can absolutely defend the European continent against a continuing existential threat from Russia. Not only that, but Europe coming together with Canada, of course, can do everything that is needed in terms of support if it is prepared to change its mindset, if it is prepared to make the sacrifices to support Ukraine, inflict defeat on Russia, which is the only way there's going to be a lasting ceasefire in that grim war.
It is very interesting to hear that, because it takes us on neatly to Mark Rutte's comments, the Secretary General of NATO, this week about Europe without the US. Let's remind ourselves of exactly what he said.
So when President Trump is doing good stuff, I will praise him. And I don't mind him publishing text messages. And if anyone thinks here, again, that the European Union or Europe as a whole can defend itself without the US, keep on dreaming. You can't.
Keep on dreaming. Europe can't defend itself without the US. Bear in mind, Ursula von der Leyen, the Commission President of the EU in the past few days, had also said that is the goal, strategic autonomy. What do you make of that?
Well, I think strategic autonomy is the only way, and I absolutely reject Mark Rutte's comments. I mean, can you imagine Churchill in 1940 saying that Britain could not defend itself without America? We are where we are. We have to. And are you telling me, I would say to Mr. Rutte, that 2.2 million European and Canadian men and women under arms cannot defend Europe? Of course we can. It's not going to be perfect. There are huge gaps. Yes, of course, America has underpinned it, and we have to step up to the mark. And we need to maintain links with America in order to ensure that there is a managed transition to European strategic autonomy. But the reality is that we cannot rely on America, and therefore we have to be ready and prepared to defend ourselves. It is a matter of will and moral courage, which we need from our political leaderships, which I'm afraid at the moment appears in some cases to be lacking.
No, your message is loud and clear on that. Let me ask you about Ukraine and where you see the conflict heading. Russia, the relentless demand to annex the entire Donbass region. The Institute for the Study of War suggesting if Ukraine continues its defence at the rate it's going, And currently it's slowed to about 15 to 17 metres a day right now, we're told, in terms of Russian advance. Again, it's extraordinarily slow. It's literally snail pace. Then Russia may take the remainder of Donbass in a year's time. What is your reading of the landscape? And if President Zelensky was to ask your advice on a way forward, what might you say?
I would say that the only way there's going to be a lasting ceasefire in Ukraine is when Russia has been defeated in Ukraine. And the only way that is going to happen is when Europe and Canada, you can forget America here, when Europe and Canada recognize that they need to design and execute a strategy to support Ukraine defeat Russia, which is going to need a massive increase in military effort, a massive increase in military spending in order to give Ukraine the military means. It's going to need economic and financial means and methods as well, particularly, for example, secondary sanctions on countries importing Russian oil and gas, and other measures, because I firmly believe that there will be no peace in Ukraine while Putin is in the Kremlin. So ultimately, Europe and Canada, together with Ukraine, need to think strategically about how to effectively bring down the Russian regime in order to effect that peace.